Welcome to the Alien Archive, the show where we dive deep into documented unexplained phenomena. Today's deep dive, brought to you by UFO Tops, takes us way back to a very cold November night in 1953, high above Lake Superior.
That's right.
We're going to try and unravel the enduring mystery of the Kinross Incident. It's this case where a U.S. Air Force jet just vanished, gone, while chasing an unidentified object.
Yeah.
And it left behind this trail of questions that honestly still fascinate people today.
It really does. And what's so compelling about the Kinross incident, I think, is how it's got all those classic elements. You know, you've got radar evidence, credible military witnesses, this sudden, complete disappearance, then conflicting official stories, and just decades of speculation. So our goal today is really to pick apart the information we do have.
Okay.
The radar reports, the official statements, the ones they made, and then, well, unmade, and all the different theories that have topped up, just to try and understand the key moments and, you know, the questions that still hang in the air.
Okay, let's set the scene then. November 23rd, 1953. So nighttime. Radar screens at two different Air Force sites picked up something odd over Lake Superior.
Yep, two locations.
One was at Sault Ste. Marie. Its codename was Naple ELS. And the other was Calumet Air Force Station, Pillow, over on the Keweenaw Peninsula.
Right. And there's a bit of discrepancy there already, isn't there, about where it was first spotted?
Yeah, some later accounts say it was near the Soo Locks, the restricted airspace.
Yeah.
But the earlier, more official reports seem to put it further west, picked up by Pillow first.
Exactly. That initial location difference is, well, it's interesting right off the bat. The Open Skies Project, they looked into this, and they point out that the Soo Locks story seems to have, like, gained steam later on. But the original Air Force docs and the news reports from the time, they mostly say Pillow on the Keweenaw Peninsula got the first radar hit.
Okay.
And where it started kind of matters for figuring out where this thing might have been going.
Right, trajectory. So this unidentified object, it shows up, triggers an alert, and Kincheloe Air Force Base people often called it Kinross back then.
Common name.
They scramble an F-89C Scorpion interceptor jet. This is at 6:22 p.m.
6:22 p.m. Got
The
it.
jet's call sign was Avenger Red, piloted by First Lieutenant Felix Moncla Jr., and his radar operator was Second Lieutenant Robert Wilson.
Right, Moncla and Wilson.
They take off, climb up to 30,000 feet, initially heading sort of west-northwest, about 300 degrees, though I read some analysis suggests it might have been more like 330 degrees.
Yeah, that's another one of those small but maybe significant details. The Open Skies Project guys, again, they noted that 300 degrees doesn't quite line up perfectly with where the jet ended up. If you accept the course corrections they got later, a heading slightly more north, like 330, maybe fits the geography better for where Avenger Red disappeared.
Makes sense.
And what's key here is this F-89C, it's a twin-engine jet designed specifically to intercept potential enemy planes, right? And it's trying to track this target that's reportedly changing course, acting erratically.
It's hard to lock onto.
Exactly. Made it tough for Wilson with the onboard radar. So ground control, Pillow, they were actively feeding them directions, you know, turn this way, turn that way, vectoring them towards this unknown object.
Okay, so they're chasing this thing for about half an hour, pushing the jet pretty hard.
Yeah, about 30 minutes. Reports say Moncla got the F-89C up to speeds around 500 miles per hour chasing this radar contact.
Wow.
And then comes the moment, the absolute crux of the incident. About 7:53 p.m., there may be 70 miles off the coast of the Keweenaw Peninsula.
Okay.
And the ground radar operators, they're watching their scopes, and they see the two separate blips, the F-89C and the unknown. They just converge. They merge into one single blip.
The merge plot. That's the term you always hear.
That's the one. It's probably the single most debated, most pictured part of this whole Kinross story. Two things becoming one on the screen.
Right. And it sounds like a collision.
It sounds like it, absolutely. That image, it strongly suggests, you know, physical contact. But we have to remember the radar tech back then.
Right, 1953 tech.
Yeah. Specifically, the ANFPS-3 radar they were using at Calumet, its range resolution was about half a mile.
Half a mile. Okay.
So what that means is when those two blips looked like one, it didn't necessarily mean they hit. It just meant they got within that half-mile bubble of each other, as far as the radar could tell.
Ah, okay. So proximity, not definitely impact.
Exactly. Close proximity. It's interesting. Commander David Fravor used the same term merge plot when he talked about the Tic Tac UAP to Congress much later in 2023. Meant the same thing close enough to appear as one target on radar.
That's a really important clarification. So, okay, they merged on the scope, What happens right after that?
Almost immediately. Right after the blips merge, the IFF signal identification friend or foe from Avenger Red just vanishes.
The signal saying, I'm friendly.
Yep, that's gone. And at the same time, they try radioing Moncla and Wilson. Nothing. Silent.
Yes, he's gone silent.
And the single blip, the merged one, it keeps going on the same course it was on for a little bit. And then it disappears from the radar, too. Poof.
Wow.
The last known position they logged for Avenger Red was around 48 degrees north latitude, 86.49 west longitude, out over the lake.
Vanished. Okay, so obviously this triggers a massive response, right? And Air Force jet is missing.
Oh, absolutely. Instantly, a huge search and rescue operation kicks off. U.S. Air Force, Royal Canadian Air Force, they both scrambled planes, got boats out there.
Searching a huge area of Lake Superior.
Massive area, the lake, the shorelines around it. But the weather was just awful.
Yeah, I remember reading that. Bad timing.
Terrible timing. Heavy snow, really strong winds, visibility was way down, and searching over that huge cold lake is hard enough without a blizzard, basically. Made it incredibly dangerous and difficult.
And despite all that effort, days of searching, nothing. No sign of the plane or the crew.
Zero. That's the thing. Despite this massive search under brutal conditions, they found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, no debris, no bodies, nothing. There were a few reports, maybe a potential wreckage spotted. One near Cut River Bridge, another way out in the Canadian wilderness, one near Lymar, Ontario.
Right.
Search teams checked out every single lead, but none of them panned out. Nothing connected back to the F-89C. So the official search, they called it off on November 28th, just 5 days after they disappeared.
5 days. Wow. So, okay, no wreckage, no physical evidence. The official explanation suddenly becomes really important. And this is where it gets messy, isn't it?
Messy is a good word for it, yeah. The first public statement the Air Force put out through the Associated Press actually confirmed the radar merge. Said the jet merged with an object 70 miles off Keweenaw Point.
So they initially confirmed the radar operator's account?
Pretty much, yeah. But then very, very quickly they retracted that statement, pulled it back.
Retracted it. Why?
Well, the news story was that the radar operator had basically misread the scope. The revised explanation claimed Moncla's F-89C had actually intercepted a Canadian C-47 Dakota transport plane.
A Canadian plane?
Yeah, a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 that was supposedly off course, flying from Winnipeg to Sudbury. And the theory then became that Moncla must have gotten vertigo on the way back and crashed into the lake.
Okay, but that explanation hit a snag pretty fast, right? Didn't the Canadians deny it?
Flat out denied it. The RCAF came back really clearly and said, nope, we had no C-47s flying over Lake Superior that night at that time. And furthermore, the crew of the actual C-47 the USAF seemed to be referring to, they said they never saw any American fighters intercept them.
So the Canadians basically blew that story out of the water.
Pretty much. And adding to the doubtfulness of it all, some reports mention that the airport in Sudbury was actually under construction then. So not exactly a likely destination.
It really sounds like they were scrambling for any explanation other than merged with a UFO.
It has that feel, doesn't it? And the inconsistencies tragically extended to Lieutenant Moncla's family, too.
Oh. What happened there?
His widow reportedly got different stories from different Air Force people about how he might have died.
Yeah.
Yeah. One version apparently said the jet crashed into the lake at low altitude. Another version claimed it exploded way up high.
Oh, that's awful. Talk about adding to the confusion and grief.
Exactly. Understandably fueled a lot of suspicion about what really happened and what the Air Force actually knew.
So then Project Blue Book steps in. The Air Force's official UFO investigation team. What did they say?
The Blue Book looked at it, and their final conclusion was accident, likely caused by pilot vertigo.
Vertigo again.
Vertigo again. They blamed the weird radar stuff on atmospheric conditions, maybe weather clutter. Then they pointed out, look, recovering anything from the deep parts of Lake Superior is really, really hard.
Which is true, but
it doesn't really answer the core questions, does it? That became the official line, but a lot of people found it deeply unsatisfying.
Yeah, it doesn't address the radar merge, the disappearing blip, the Canadian denial.
Precisely. And investigators from groups like NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, they claimed they found evidence that key mission details about Kinross had been scrubbed, like removed from the official record.
A cover-up.
That's what they suggested. Adding fuel to that fire, the Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center apparently stated they had no record of any unusual sighting at Kinross AFB on that date. which seems weird given they scrambled a jet, right?
Yeah, that directly contradicts the known facts. Those discrepancies are pretty glaring.
They really are, and they definitely keep the mystery alive.
Which, of course, leads us straight into the alternative theories. And Donald Keyhoe looms large here, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, Major Donald Keyhoe, big name in early ufology. He wrote about Kinross in his 1955 book, The Flying Saucer Conspiracy.
What was his take?
His version had the UFO initially over the Sulaks, remember that location discrepancy?
Right.
He spelled the base Kinross, small error there, but he really leaned into the radar merge, interpreting it as a definite collision.
Saw it as proof of contact.
Exactly. And crucially, Keyhoe also reported that the single merged blip then vanished completely. His narrative painted this picture of a direct, possibly hostile encounter.
His version became really influential, didn't it? Even if some details were off.
Hugely influential. It really cemented Kinross as a major UFO case in the public mind. But yeah, as researchers like the Open Skies Project point out, some details in Keyhoe's account, the initial location, the spelling, don't match other records. And his collision interpretation probably came from, not fully understanding the radar's limitations back then.
Like the half-mile resolution we talked about.
Exactly. But his dramatic retelling definitely captured the imagination.
And beyond Keyhoe, there were other, maybe wilder theories.
Oh yeah. Project Blue Book mentioned civilian saucer groups had ideas. Some pretty out there, like the F-89 hitting some kind of protective beam from the UFO.
A beam.
Yeah. Or even that the jet was somehow like scooped up whole by the alien craft.
Okay, that's pretty speculative.
Very speculative. Absolutely no evidence for that kind of thing, but it shows how far people's imaginations went with this.
There were also a couple of times later on when wreckage was found and people thought, maybe this is it.
That's right, yeah. In 1968, some aircraft wreckage turned up near Cozen's Cove, Ontario.
Okay.
And there was a bit of buzz because someone apparently described the metal as heavier than usual aircraft metal. So speculation started, could this be the F-89?
But it wasn't.
Authorities eventually said it was unlikely to be Moncla's jet. But they never really gave a clear explanation for what that wreckage was, and apparently its location now is unknown. So another little mystery there.
Huh. And then there was that hoax much later.
Right.
In 2006.
Yeah. The Great Lakes Dive Company hoax. This guy, Adam Jimenez, claimed he'd found the F-89 wreckage and a piece of a flying saucer, like a metallic disc fragment.
Curious.
Made a big splash for a minute, but it was quickly exposed as a total fake. The company didn't exist, the discovery was fabricated, just a deliberate hoax muddying the waters.
Right. So lots of dead ends and misinformation over the years. Okay, let's circle back to the plane itself. The F-89C Scorpion. You mentioned it was an interceptor, but did it have issues? A bad reputation?
Unfortunately, yeah. The F-89C had a pretty rocky history, especially early on. It was actually the USAF's first jet designed from the ground up as an all-weather interceptor, advanced for its day, but plagued with problems. Engine failures were common, and worse, there were serious structural weaknesses, particularly in the wings. This actually led to several F-89Cs breaking apart in midair back in 1952.
Breaking apart? Wow.
Yeah, catastrophic failures. It got so bad they grounded the entire F-89C fleet for major modifications to strengthen the structure.
Did the fixes work?
They helped, but some reports suggest that even after the fixes, the plane's performance wasn't quite right. Maybe limitations at high or low altitude?
That's a really significant factor to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given what... And didn't you say there were other F-89 crashes right around the same time as Kinross?
Tragically, yes. It's a grim coincidence. Just hours before Moncla and Wilson vanished over Lake Superior. Hours before. Another F-89C from the same squadron but based at Truax Field in Wisconsin crashed near Madison, exploded. Both crew members were killed.
Oh my God.
And there were other incidents too. An emergency landing earlier that year due to severe engine vibrations. A mid-air collision involving an F-89C just a few weeks before Kinross. So, this context. This pattern of known mechanical problems and accidents with the F-89C, it definitely makes mechanical failure a very plausible explanation for Avenger Red's disappearance.
Yeah, you can't ignore that history. Okay, we touched on the radar's range resolution. Any other technical radar quirks from the 50s relevant here?
Yeah, a couple of things. We mentioned the half-mile range resolution on the main scope, the ANFPS-3. It's also likely the altitude of the target was being tracked by a separate bit of kit, a height finder antenna, probably an ANFPS-5.
Okay, separate altitude tracking.
Right. So if the F-89 suddenly dove, like really rapidly, it might not have been immediately obvious on that main radar scope. which was focused on tracking the target laterally at its last known altitude.
Ah, so they might not have seen a sudden crash on the main screen.
Possibly not immediately. Also, radar shadow. At low altitudes and long distances, hills or even the curvature of the Earth can block radar signals. If the F-89 did descend quickly, maybe chasing something or due to a problem, it could have just dropped below the radar horizon, causing the blip to vanish.
Especially out over the lake at 70 miles.
Exactly. And one more thing, kind of procedural. If they really thought the target was just a Canadian C-47 off course, why didn't they try calling them on the radio first?
Good question. Before scrambling a fighter jet.
Right. Why scramble an interceptor before just trying to hail the supposed friendly aircraft? It suggests maybe they weren't sure what it was, or perhaps it was some kind of training exercise with specific rules of engagement. Another unanswered question.
Yeah, lots of those. Okay, so pulling all this together, when people talk about the Kinross Incident, what are the key quotes, the really sticky parts of the story that keep coming up?
Well, definitely Lieutenant Moncla's gravestone. That inscription. Disappeared, intercepting a UFO over Canadian border. That's incredibly powerful and gets quoted a lot.
Yeah.
The image of the radar blips merging into one, that's iconic for this case. And in some versions, the fact that the single blip then disappears too, that sequence is really striking. Then there are the conflicting official stories from the Air Force. That back and forth definitely fuels suspicion and is a major point people raise.
The Vertigo story versus the Canadian plane story.
Right. And the RCAF's immediate strong denial of that Canadian plane story, that's another key piece that deepens the puzzle.
Can't forget that.
The total lack of wreckage, despite that big search, is still just baffling to many. Where did it go? And of course, all the theories, from the plausible mechanical failure, vertigo, to the really out there stuff like alien abduction or energy beams. The sheer range of speculation shows how much this case grabs people.
And the timing of the other F-89 crashes.
Yeah, that coincidence, especially the crash just hours before, definitely makes you think hard about the plane's reliability. It's a detail that often pulls people back towards a more conventional, if tragic, explanation.
So, after digging into all this, we're really left with, well, a persistent mystery, aren't we? The Kinross Incident is this tangle of facts, contradictions, speculation. It just doesn't seem to resolve neatly.
Not at all. It's a classic for a reason. It really highlights how tough it can be to figure out what really happened decades ago, especially with limited tech, missing info, maybe even deliberate obfuscation, who knows.
Yeah.
Kinross just keeps going because it hits those big questions. What do we know for sure? What can't we know? And what might just stay unexplained?
Which leads us perfectly to our final thought for you, our listener. When you weigh everything, the limits of 1950s technology, the F-89C's known problems, those really inconsistent official stories, what do you think is the most likely reason Avenger Red and its crew vanished over Lake Superior that night?
It's a question that still sparks debate, still invites analysis, and maybe, in the end, requires us to accept a certain amount of, well, uncertainty.
This has been our deep dive into the 1953 Lake Superior UFO incident, the Kinross Incident, right here on the Alien Archive.
And the Alien Archive is brought to you by UFO Tops.